Because it's an election year, and I remind you, we're nonpartisan as an organization. We like to go after anybody who gets an elected office who affects the outcome of our goal. We don't really care what they are, as long as they understand it. So this year, I'll just tell you some of the things that we need to consider. And overall, remember, in your communications, keep them simple. Whether it's federal or state, you probably realize that rail passengers not up there with roads and highways, school budgets, or at the federal level with the things that are significant there. So keep your message simple and short. We've done a lot of mailing, and so to start off, I want to have him raise his hand. The ever-patient Mr. Fisher from La Crosse, who worked with me on the survey. Thanks, Bob. We managed to send hundreds out. I managed to put 10 to 12 or maybe even 15 in the mail by mistake that didn't have a stamp or an insert. So Bob started getting phone calls to correct that. But he's patient. We did get actually a number of good responses. So I'll just start off by telling you what those are and reading the way we phrase the questions. I had proposed this a few years ago, and we followed the format because I served in local elected office. Politicians don't like to answer questions that have yes or no. So our surveys only have that option. And basically, surprisingly, we've got 12, 14 members so far, or candidates for the legislature. I don't track whether they're in there or just running, who've responded to direct yes and no questions with yeses. And I assume the others who haven't responded perhaps felt no or didn't consider it important. If elected, you can fill in state assembly, state senate, or even Congress. Will you support in each year of your term continued funding for Amtrak at its current levels in Wisconsin? Yes, no. If elected, will you support, remember, WisARP has a single goal we're pushing hard now, and that's a second train. If elected, will you support establishment of a second daily train across Wisconsin, the existing route of the Empire Builder? Parens, estimated cost capital investment, and I get this from the state, $142 million to $188 million, annual operating costs of $5.64 million to $6.61 million to be shared between Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and the federal government. Yes, no. So there's no wiggle room, and you can't claim what you're being asked you don't know the numbers on. So in spite of that, we get a good return. And I have some handouts that you can pass around. I probably didn't make enough. And that's just a summary, if you want to pass those around, of the assembly district, because we didn't get a state senator response, by number, the person's name, and then you'll see very boldly the two yeses. For the first time, because in the primary I didn't get responses from either candidate for governor or anybody running for the Senate, we did get a response from someone running for the U.S. Senate. Happened to be our incumbent with two yeses, so I put that in there. That's a new benchmark in responses, because often those folks won't even respond to us at all, even if they'd be yeses. So what this does, even when they don't respond, is it reminds them of what we're about and why we consider this an issue. So if you're going to run for an office that's going to be your family support for that next 2 years, 6 years, 4 years, you have to step right up front or stay out of it. So again, thanks to Bob, because it was a long effort year, because we mailed to a lot of them. I did not, you'll notice, get responses from either candidate for governor of Wisconsin.
John, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because my state representative is not on this list, but I know she supports it. Is anybody else in that situation? You know your state representative, and you know they're supportive? She was unopposed.
Yeah.
So there was.
Yeah, well, Bob and I, we decided to send to everybody.
I know you sent
Yeah.
her.
And this morning, I got handed one from District 58, Dennis Dagenhart, with a yes, yes on it. So what we're doing is sending these out electronically for those of you who are getting the WisARP emails. So we'll go right up to the election day and send out any updates. But to have in writing that many of them, so far we have 13 or 14. Assembly only has 100 in it that are willing to, if they're elected, I don't know if they're incumbents or challengers, would vote for that. And you know that that's the next key issue coming up, is the cost of the second train and the capital investment and the fight between the four entities that have to share the cost. And, you know, Minnesota, as was mentioned at our spring meetings, had some issues. They have a full sweep election with a non-incumbent governor, so, but to make it work, you have to have all three states. So all we can do is focus on the middle and make sure we don't cut a hole between Illinois and Minnesota in running that second train. But again, in all your communications, focus on simplicity. It's fiscally responsible. This is what it costs. There's more benefits than... So what we'll be doing as we go ahead, nationally, we can knock on a little wood. I was at the meeting in La Crosse where Amtrak had their representative Chicago, and he was pleased to point out that 2 years in a row, Amtrak has the largest budget in its history. So we're taking the stance of, if you're in the federal government, we want to keep that. We don't want to regress back. Again, you have a bipartisan situation. We have to push both sides of the aisle to make that work. So that's our national goal. Then we have one vacancy for sure in our national slate of officers, and that's District 1, Congressional District 1, where the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, has chosen not to run again. So what WisARP will do is go after whoever wins that election and try to educate. Remember, we're an educator, we're not a lobbyist, so we'll make sure that the new House member from the southern part of the state at least sees our case and what we'd like. And we'll keep it short enough, because they'll be deluged by everybody, that hopefully it will at least get noted. So then we move to the state and what you can do there. Obviously you vote, and we don't tell you how to vote. Once someone is elected, we want to focus this year on those who are new in the legislature, and there's going to be a number of those. So whichever wins, Democrat, Republican, whatever, we are going to go after them, again, with a single-page handout in addition to our usual, saying, this is WisARP, this is our goal, this is what it'll cost, will you please support it? In the case of the second train, you know where we are with these numbers. First, we have to placate the railroad with the capital that they're looking for. And then the issue comes down to the state, because they would have to offset part of what Amtrak will conceive of as a loss. And of course, some of us who worked on the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative know that this route is not supposed to run at a loss. Probably won't, but you have to get into the accounting. So you have to be ready, as a lesson learned from when the $800 million was given back. The official statement always was for service into Madison, it's that annual subsidy we'll have to put in. So as a member of WisARP, if you believe in this operation of a second train, then you have to be ready to articulate that and explain why it's a good expenditure or investment for Wisconsin. And unlike most of the rest of the world, passenger rail here is almost totally user-funded. So you've got a good point in your initial kickoff. The people benefiting from it really stand up to it. So that will be our push, is to try to make sure that we get this new group coming in ready for whoever's governor or whatever the budgets are. The service between Pewaukee and Chicago, you notice I always say that correct. I was coached never to use the other city first. But even under the current situation, they are studying 2 additional trains a day. So all we're asking for is that people would back that. We'd like to see wider expansion through Wisconsin, but we're certainly not going to oppose upgrades down there from 7 or 8 trains a day to 9 or 10. How many?
3 additional.
3 additional, okay. See, Nona's dated me. I was back when they were talking 2. But it's the idea that we've got a good base to build on. And so in a very non-antagonistic way, we're going to push this legislature, because this will be the year where the costs will start to get more expensive. We had the first year that got funded. Some counties in Minnesota funded their share. We even had help from La Crosse County, but now you're getting into the final engineering design phase where it's going to cost more. And so our goal is to make sure incrementally each year we move towards getting that done. And understanding that you're competing against groups in the state, I don't care which side of politics you're on, that are always going to be in there asking for more. I was on a county board and I was president of a school board, so I'm real familiar with all of that. And way down here is us, but we can be very effective because we're not asking for a lot, and it makes good common sense. So far as going ahead, I would be careful, obviously, in mixing in the highway battle. A couple of years ago, we had a good speaker from Madison who pointed out that the money that's already there, if you were using it right, because the number of drivers isn't really going up, could be diverted somewhat from major projects to fixing the roads. And I live in La Crosse, where the city's got a proposal, the county's got a proposal, and so just for reference, kind of to echo that speaker of years ago, but personalize it, in the last few years in La Crosse, we have finished a traffic circle downtown, 2.3 million, took 6 taxable properties off tax rolls. Exit number 3 in the interstate was redone, 75 million. I was there from when exit 3 was first built and never had any problems driving it. So part of it, if you're drawn into this debate about, well, we need to put more money on highways even if we have to take from rail the small amount we're giving, is not to attack the highways, but simply to point out how they're choosing to spend it. And that gets you out of the middle of that one and gets our issue out of the middle of that one. Then the last thing is a concern I have. Way back, I heard that if such and such was a such and such, they'd probably eat their own children. In other words, the idea of attacking things you actually believe in because you don't like some aspect of it. And recently, there have been a couple articles I've read in rail-honored magazines. One that was rather defensive of the idea that Amtrak ought to cover all of its costs. And a second one that I read which said that, well, there's nothing wrong with discontinuing meals because Congress in whatever it was, 2015, 2012, passed a law that you had to. And of course, there's a certain naivety about that because that begins to dismantle the continuity of the service that we have. And if you followed it closely, shutting down the Southwest Chief and making Congress have to try to override Amtrak was, to many of us, pretty embarrassing. Well, we're going to put you on a bus and we're going to run you from here to there. And this was in light of the fact that Amtrak had the largest budget that it's ever had. So they couldn't claim money issues because I believe their commitment was like $3 million. And so now you had senators in those 3 states having to go in and override Amtrak when Amtrak's supposed to advocate for this stuff, and then we're supposed to be trying to get Congress to go along with them. So beyond my usual speech to you of keep your eyes on Congress is something that I will definitely put in the next newsletter. You need to start focusing on the Amtrak Board of Directors. Right now, the recommendations obviously are not coming from Congress. If you've ever served on a board, and I've served on several, usually it'll say you hire the chief executive officer, the president, or whatever title they use, then you give him or her an overall sense of direction. So the ex-head of Delta Airlines being hired as the head of Amtrak, and I'm going to spend my time up here picking on him, was the board's decision. Congress didn't hire, the board did. The board obviously had to go along with the proposal to truncate at rail, the proposal to take meals off first class. So it's time to start, in spite of something I recently got from NARP, and I used to be a director when it was still called NARP, we shouldn't be picking on the board, or we shouldn't be calling for the firing of the CEO. I'm not asking you to call for the firing of the CEO. I'm asking for you to start shining light on the board. Understand who they are, so I'll be providing you their addresses. Understand that it's not a public service thing. I think I was telling Nona, I Googled it because I thought it was public service, and I think they're paid $140,000 a year. You can check it out yourself, but they work for you. And it's time for you to go and make sure that you understand you don't agree with these types of decisions, these cutbacks. So always be militant when you own a company, you live in a school district or whatever. Remember, you go to the policy setters. It's not the top employee.
Aren't most, I've seen where the last two board members have been appointed by President Trump.
When I looked this summer, there were no Trump appointees. In other words, at that point, I think there were terms that were up where they were dawdling and getting somebody in. And I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but it disappointed me that every single board member had been appointed or reappointed, even during what we've considered as a positive administration towards Amtrak the last 8 years, with the exception of the Secretary of Transportation, who's nominated by this president and confirmed by the Senate. So we need to keep on them. I don't care who's in the White House. I don't care what their political affiliations were. You need to hold their feet to the fire so that they're not endorsing management suggestions that start to take this system apart at the time in which you have your biggest budget.
How is the board really elected or chosen? Is there,
As I recall, they're appointed by the president, nominally confirmed by the Senate, and they have that one ex officio member, Secretary of Transportation, who of course is, I'm sure, nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but I remember it as their presidential appointees because our governor was on it for a while, and they have a nominal Senate. You know, the Senate's got all these confirmations, and if you're nominated to something like the Amtrak board, it's not like Supreme Court nomination. It doesn't get any attention to speak. So in fact, it's time, you know, it's like you're living in your town and you're unhappy with the bus routes that take your kids into school. Well, you can rail on the superintendent, but your best answer is pick the phone up and call the school board member. It's amazing. I've been one of those, how quick that straightens issues out. So don't be timid in going after the board of directors. You're paying them to work for operation of Amtrak, and when they're going to start endorsing things, in spite of this level of public support, that shut pieces of Amtrak down, that's not, at least in my personal opinion, the way I want people who I've helped hire and fund do their job. So what you do individually is up to you, but I will make sure you have the tools in your hands of how to get to them.
Where do you think Mr. Anderson is really getting these bad ideas from?
Personally, I think some of them obviously come up from some in the staff. Some could well come from a board or a member of Congress. So whenever you get these things coming in, you know, people, and I'm sure retiring from Delta, he doesn't need the money. But it's the idea that this is your job, and it's significant to have the title to some people, regardless of whether they need it for a living. So you get pressures from everybody. And the drop the meal thing and the little package thing going east sort of reminded me of that congressional fascination. But that chopping the train off in the middle of the route, that sounds something more like a staff recommendation that they at least went along with. So what you're doing is you're trying to focus on this guy who's got the big title and trying to keep him focused on what's the future of Amtrak, and it isn't shutting down the national network, by the way. And then, if you're not getting a response from him, you go to the board members. You get a response there. And if they get enough hits, because right now, they're kind of living in the dark. Most of us don't even know who they are. So we'll berate our congressman on the 50th issue that we've ever written him or her a letter on. And, you know, they'll send you a neat response back. But for these people, their only job is being a director of Amtrak. so you can get heard. And I'm like you, I kind of wonder where some of the stuff's coming from, but I don't know the internal workings of the hired staff, and I don't know the interactions with some of the members of Congress who just are after food on trains all the time.
I've experienced the box lunches in the last, in September. It was interesting. I have to admit that there was one or two that were decent, but but I was much surprised
Yeah.
because I wrote a letter on it to Anderson.
Well, and it's the whole idea that, we are and I'm not against this, the highest user-funded rail passenger network in the world. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But then, because we are putting more in, there's a young couple from La Crosse that my son had been pushing to take their 6-year-old to Whitefish once so they could experience the train.
Yeah.
So they called in January, which is not high season, and the family bedroom from just La Crosse to Whitefish and back, $6,500.
Crazy.
Well, you're starting to get up there where you're beginning to knock out a lot of people, and when you start knocking younger people out, where's tomorrow's ridership going to come from?
Food service on trains is a total misconception. And in today's world, I don't think that people on that board realize, in the Southern Pacific Railway came out with that in 1940. They said that we don't make money on food service. It is a service that we provide to the traveling public. And that is a concept, I think, that has been totally lost. Reagan tried to do it during his administration. We went through the same thing with dining car service and downgrading it. It has never been intended to make money.
No, I don't disagree with you. And you have to remember,
That's a concept that has been
Yeah.
totally lost.
remember who you're competing with. What's the lowest paid sector in private industry pretty much in our society? Food service. So historically, Amtrak is a union shop that tries to pay people for the jobs they do. So that's automatically going to drive the cost of running a food service in Amtrak above your local fast food restaurant. Oh, yeah, I'm getting reminded. But you don't mind if I just go on and on and on? Okay, one last question.
I was going to ask if somebody could actually clarify the dining car thing. You variously read the dining car has been eliminated, or it's only open to sleeper passengers, and you get only boxed lunches that are nuked at best.
Well, to my recollection, they've been experimenting with the box lunches on some of the eastern runs.
You get to
Dining,
eat them in the dining car?
This one was to Boston.
yeah. And I'm sorry, dining car has always been open to everybody.
So that get the box lunches.
And the dining car's never just been for sleeper passengers. It's just that it's included in their fare. Coach passengers pay when they go in.
And I read it's a ghost town because people take their box lunch back to their sleeper.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been
And it's, of
fortunately
course,
involved
closed
in
to
that.
coach passengers.
Because they use it as an observation car too.
No, okay.
Because